Isn't it a little bit crazy for a publicly traded restaurant chain with 70,000 people to mostly hire folks who don't quite fit into other places or may have messed up a few times? Isn't it lunacy for a huge restaurant chain to do almost no national advertising? Is it certifiable to keep prices low even as food and labor costs continue to rise? Or to avoid hiring anyone with an MBA or a PhD? Or to keep the menu basically the same since it opened decades before? Does it fly in the face of conventional sanity to not allow coats and ties in the home office, to the point of keeping scissors handy to cut neckties off visitors? Or have a founder, chairman, and CEO who dresses like he's part of the landscaping crew? Probably. Texas Roadhouse has always been first and foremost about its people and guest satisfaction. They know that if they take care of their roadies, they'll take care of their guests. It's blasphemy to put people over profits, to ignore the percentages and focus on making employees happy. Such beliefs would probably earn you a D or an F, which are exactly the grades Kent earned in graduate business school. This MBA dropout's company's net income graph for the next 3 decades looks like a Stairmaster. Welcome to Texas Roadhouse, where crazy works. These selections were from the preface of the book Made from Scratch, the legendary success story of Texas Roadhouse. And this is an autobiography that was written by their legendary founder, Kent Taylor, who was an overnight success. 20 years in the making, that is. If this book's not in your library, I would highly suggest picking up a copy. It is loaded with valuable insights about business and about life. And what I like is at the end of each chapter, there's a lessons learned page that is worth the price of admission alone, if you ask me. Now, Kent, he was a firm believer in learning from his mistakes and his successes, along with sharing what he learned and learning from others at the same time. This is demonstrated by his actions many times throughout the book. Just as a quick tip, at the start of each chapter, I would highly recommend actually skipping to the lessons learned page and read that first. It gives you a little warm up of what to expect. Then once you arrive at that lesson in the chapter, it already feels familiar. And then when you finish the chapter, if you reread it, you're basically seeing that lesson 3 times, and that really helps with enforcement. I really wish a lot more books would do this. I think it's really brilliant if you ask me. Now, if you're in the restaurant industry and you want to advance your career or possibly start your own business, I believe this is an absolute must-read book. It is a roadmap for those of us working in the restaurant industry. However, if you're not in that particular industry, there is more than an equal amount of learning opportunity in this book. It is loaded with a lot of valuable lessons that we can use in any aspect of our businesses. Plus, the book has a lot of crazy. Kent, he loved his employees and his friends and his family, and it's really heartwarming to see a founder and an executive put his team first in all situations, and I'm a really big fan, to say the least. Look, if you ask me, who would you rather spend the day with? Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Michael Jordan, or Kent Taylor? For me, that is easy. Kent Taylor. And you might be asking yourself, why? Who's Kent Taylor? Maybe you're just learning about Kent Taylor today. Well, let me tell you, I would spend the day with Kent because I believe that he would listen to me as a human, and I would be genuinely cared about and provided with a lot of high quality lessons that Kent had learned over the course of his career. At the same time, I also believe that he would listen to my ideas and suggestions and insights, and it would be a mutually beneficial day between the both of us. There would be a lot of practical and wise lessons learned. I actually feel like I should be applying for a job at Texas Roadhouse after reading this book. So, how about we jump in and take a look at Kent's relentless journey throughout his life? Now, it says in the book that Kent was born in 1955, but the book starts out with Kent on the football field as a freshman in high school And at that time, he's not very tall. He's only 5'2" it says. However, right out of the gate, we get to really see that he has this strong drive and a determination. And the coach is going to look at his performance on the field and he's basically going to tell the other kids to work as hard as that punk over there. Basically, meaning that Kent was working his ass off, and the kids that were bigger and more athletic, they were basically slacking. So the coach really wanted them to look after Kent and his effort and take after his effort. But however, even with this hard work that he was putting forth, he's still going to ride the pine for most of the season. After his sophomore year, the coach is going to tell him the following: Taylor, don't even think about coming back next year. If I let you get into the game, they're going to kill you. I mean, you could die. Why don't you go try the track team where a skinny little kid like you can maybe do something? Those, my friend, are very harsh words, especially for a young teenager like that. But sometimes we really need to hear that harsh truth. There's certainly value in business when we surround ourselves in our organization with those folks and trusted advisors that are willing to tell us no, or they're willing to offer different points of view. We really need that check and balance to keep us straightforward and honest here. Now, Kent's football coach, he had done a little bit of prep work to help him out, and he had talked to the track coach in advance. And once he goes to see the track coach, he's going to have him run a few laps, and he's going to give him some further harsh words, saying the following: I hate to say this, Kent, but you apparently have no natural speed or talent, so your only option is long distance. That's just brutal, I tell you. That's twice now. So, what does he do? He signs up for the cross country team, and Kent says the following: I finished my first race near the back of the pack, getting lapped by the better runners, and I got laughed at in the process by the kids in the stands. And right here at an early age, Kent is getting bounced around from various teams. He has a lack of athletic ability, but he's not going to just give up. He's got that really special drive. It reminds me a lot of Michael Jordan when he got cut from his high school basketball team. He would say that that really lit a fire in him and it drove him to work even harder and he became obsessed with the game, waking up early to shoot hoops in the backyard or going down to the gym to shoot hoops. He grew physically and he added muscle and body weight. We all know what happens to the Jordan story after that. Now, in much the same way, Kent, he has this exact same fire that Jordan had. And he says the following: I wanted more than anything to prove to the other guys, my coach, and the grandstand golfers that they were wrong. So before his junior year, he's going to be running 6 to 8 miles a day. This really allowed him to progress into what would become an average runner. In addition, it says that he grew about 8 inches in the book, and this would allow him to finish in the middle of the pack, if you will. This got the naysayers off his back. There was no longer people in the stands laughing at him. So we can see that through his hard work, he's certainly making progress, but he's not quite satisfied. And he keeps going. He's pushing hard. And we can learn a really great lesson from Kent right here. He says the following: between my junior and senior year, I learned what would be my greatest lesson in running, something that would eventually help me in the early days of Texas Roadhouse. That ladies dig Letterman jackets. Actually, just kidding. The lesson was if you outwork the other guys, you will eventually get to where you want to go and be somewhat luckier than others think you ought to be. Just a couple of observations here. One, I love the humor that Kent includes in the book. It's really refreshing to see someone not be all wrapped around themselves. And I've read that selection probably 10 times now reviewing for the podcast, and it makes me laugh every time. The second observation here is I have to say, spot on. If you just plain outwork the other guys, you will definitely get to where you want to go. And then that luck part, well, I think that just comes from freaking outworking everyone else. How many times have we seen this on the podcast already? This philosophy, it's embedded in almost everyone that you and I study. Elon Musk pops to mind right away. If we go back to episode 7, we saw how he was working 16, 18, 20 hours a day at SpaceX in those early days, setting the example for his team, grinding super hard, Also, Sam Zamuri, the banana man, no one outworked that guy. Hell, he even outworked entire governments. And Kent, right here, he has this exact same drive. And this lesson is going to be a great teacher for him for the rest of his life. It's an excellent one for you and I also. Outwork everyone, my friend. Now, between his junior and his senior years, we're going to see him working even harder. He's going to log more than 1,500 miles of running in one summer. That's just crazy. That's a lot of miles. I just wanted to read how Kent would describe this transformation. I had been building up the muscles in my heart, and by cross country season was able to pump blood farther with less exertion, increasing my lung capacity to bring more oxygen to my leg muscles. Most importantly, I was expanding my brain's ability to tolerate pain and push myself beyond what I had felt possible. I was reshaping myself and my destiny. I really think those last two sentences are magic for you and I just want to read them again. Most importantly, I was expanding my brain's ability to tolerate pain and push myself beyond what I had felt possible. I was reshaping myself and my destiny. These are the results of what happened when we really dig into painful situations in life and we push ourselves. We reshape our brain and our ability to accept that pain and to push beyond that pain. Imagine for a second if Kent would have just sat on the sidelines all summer. This is going to ultimately lead him to just being average. And Kent, he's not looking for average. Later in life, when his brain knows this pain, it can say, wait, I've been down this road before and it's okay. I can work 100 hours a week at Bennigan's. I can get rejected more than 130 times to find an investor for Texas Roadhouse. I made it out alive last time. Let's go, baby. Bring it on. And Kent is exactly right. He was reshaping his destiny through those 1,500 miles. As he starts his senior season, he's going to be faster and faster with each race. What do you think his strategy was? It was to accelerate up the hills. He says pushing for max pain. This really allowed him to overcome runners who were faster than him on the flats. In this strategy, it's going to see him beating out the previous year's state champ, who was also a friend and a mentor, and his name was Steve Bullock. Now, Steve's going to have a pivotal role for Kent here in the near future, as we'll soon see. Kent's going to go on to have a stellar senior year. His high school would win the state championship, in which he was a strong part of, even though it says that he had the flu on race day. It kind of flashes me back to Michael Jordan in the playoffs when he had the flu and came out on the floor and dominated everyone. I imagine Kent doing the same thing here on the track and field team. So at this point, his future is looking really bright. And Kent, he's going to turn his sights on trying to find a college where he can run and maybe cash in on some of those scholarship bucks. So in the spring of 1972, Kent would go with his friend Steve. He was the one that I had mentioned just a little bit ago. They would go visit the University of North Carolina to take a little visit of the campus. Steve had already been accepted on a full scholarship ride, but he does get an introduction with Kent to the coach. That's where he's helping his buddy out here. And this was a really big deal for Kent. He's going to make his case to the track coach, telling him how many miles he's run, how well he's improved, what my times are. Here's all the positions I finished. Here's how well I've done on all the races. I mean, he's basically putting everything out there in front of the coach. The coach is going to respond and basically say, hey, we don't have any more scholarship money left for you at this time, but can't he insist on leaving his number with the coach just in case something comes up. Kent says that this really pushed him outside of his comfort zone, but the big question here, would this pay off? Well, lo and behold, over the summer, he's going to get a call from that track coach who says that one of the high jumpers had backed out and that he was in on a half scholarship. We can see right here that Kent's tenacity really paid off for him in a big way. If he would have just been timid and not put himself out there, this opportunity maybe would have never came forth. So I think that's a great lesson, just to always be pushing and make people aware of your abilities and what you can do for them. Now, once Kent arrives at college, he is going to kind of take the path of a lot of the students there, and he's going to fall into partying. And he says that he barely made it out of college with passing grades. He says that for his freshman and sophomore years, his running was generally up and down. He was kind of an average runner, and it seems like maybe he was more in love with the ice cold bud versus running around on the track. But prior to his junior year, he has kind of a revitalization, if you will. In the summer before his junior year, Kent had taken a job as a camp counselor in the Great Smoky Mountains. And it's here that he rediscovers his love of running. He says the following: "Running in the mountains was refreshing, zen, or something cosmic. The summer love affair with the Smoky Mountains is something that stays with me to this day. I got myself into the best shape of my life." This hard work, it really pays off big time. In his junior year, he's going to crush just about everything. He would finish second in the ACC championships, and then he would also qualify for the NCAA championships. He was only one of four people on his team that would qualify for that championship. Then, as he's going into his senior year, he says he wasn't quite as good, but he would finish and he would get out with his degree and a bunch of lessons learned, such as how to hook multiple kegs together, market yourself to college co-eds, and how to deal with the barriers in life. Again, I love the sense of humor here. So, what would he do now? I think that is a really great question. Let's see what he says. "I took that well deserved 4-year diploma, and with a full sack of gumption and moxie, I marched back to my old job working for Dottie Mann at the Captain's Quarters restaurant in Louisville, this time as a server." Kent had started working at this restaurant in high school as a busser, and this is really his first taste of the restaurant business. Let's stay in the book here just for a minute. We're going to get a first peek at Kent's purpose in life right here. I think this is magical and is critical towards where he's going to be going in the future. "A little older and wiser, I became fascinated by how the kitchen processed orders, who on the team excelled and who sucked, and what specials garnered the most interest. I really did like waiting tables, rushing around, upselling items, and finding ways to entertain the various types of guests. The tips I counted at the end of each shift were a trophy of sorts, providing that I had done some kick-ass work." On the show, we always talk about that concept that in life, chance is the cards that you're dealt, and then choice is how you play them. I believe right here, this is Kent playing his cards. He's getting them all arranged, if you will, and it's going to take him a little bit of time to get them all in order, but we're seeing that first hint of Kent's purpose right here. I always think that's special. I think it's magical, and he's going to use it to propel him for the rest of his career. In the meantime, Kent's next move is going to be to start taking MBA classes at the University of Kentucky. He's also going to find himself running with the track team and then doing a bartending gig for his uncle. It really seems like during this period of time, he had a mix of a lot of different activities going on. And at the same time, he had one semester of eligibility left to run in track. So he would head back to the University of North Carolina and he would participate on the track team. With about 6 weeks left in the season, he's going to be injured. That basically ended his college running days. Now, Kent, he really knows how to have fun. And with this injury, he's going to say the following: "I had 3 choices. 1, dutifully attend my PE grad courses. 2, move back to Lexington, get a job, and prepare for my MBA summer school. Or 3, blow off classes, party, go to the beach, do some camping in the North Carolina mountains." What to do, what to do. And for Ken, it's going to be option 3. At least he was being open and honest with us here. For me, I do find it uplifting that Kent is really an open book about his life. After this little sabbatical, he is going to return to grad school. But remember, he's got a lot of things going on in his life at this point, and he's basically also doing full-time bartending work. I think he was just having more fun bartending, and he was having a lot of fun in Lexington as well. As a result, his grades are really going to suffer, and he eventually drops out of the MBA program, with D's and F's that very last semester. Past this point in the book, everything going forward is going to be full time work for Kent. I think you could also say that this is when his real education begins. Kent, he's not a passive guy, and we're going to see him dig in super deep in everything that he does. It really reminds me of what you and I spoke about on episode 4 with Jay Gould, who made his fortune in the stock market and in the railroads, and perhaps was one of the top 10 richest men of all time. His belief that hands on, practical experience outweighed that of academics. The real world discipline and education were far more valuable than any traditional education you might get through formal schooling. Now, that doesn't mean that we should stop educating ourselves. Gould, he was an avid reader and he was super smart. Kent Taylor, he's in the same vein, in that he valued real world application and he really shaped his leadership through practical books and lots of them. And more on that shortly. We'll talk about Kent and reading. He loves to read. One of Kent's first gigs after he had finished his MBA program was as a door to door salesman. But after 3 months, he found himself back to bartending at TGI Fridays. He's slinging drinks there and he's having a good time. He's doing really well until he's hit with a reality call from his father. He would visit home one day, and Kent's father is going to sit him down and tell him the following: Son, the friends you've graduated with are getting good corporate jobs. They're building their futures. And here you are, bartending. Ouch. Ken is certainly stung right here. Reminds me of the harsh words he heard from his football and his track coaches at an early age. He really kind of has a choice, I guess. We see some entrepreneurs that just go completely against their parents, and then others really take them to heart. Kent's going to say the following: Good thing there were no cell phones then, as such parental scolding couldn't last past the front door. I didn't even have a landline, so Dad could only tell me off if I went home for a free meal. And I didn't go for a while. Still, his words stuck, and eventually I went to see my Uncle Bill. Before we talk about his Uncle Bill, just a few thoughts right here. Throughout the book, Kent mentions his dad many times over and over, and how much he admired him and how proud he was of him. His father, Powell Taylor, had worked at GE for more than 35 years, and even though he didn't own his own business, he acted like he did, particularly in terms of work ethic, drive, and organizational skills, where he was one of the general managers and he was highly respected across the company. I think that's just a valuable insight right there, that if you're working for a company, you can still act as if you're the owner. And this is going to move you up the ranks very quickly. Plus, it sets a solid example for those of us who have children. Remember, more is caught than taught. Our children are always watching our actions, and we can see firsthand that this was really impactful for Kent. Starting young, building a foundation by cutting grass and bussing tables and washing dishes during high school. And then it just goes from here. He has that deep drive that's always going to propel him forward to do excellent work and do great things. Let's take a look and see what happens next with his Uncle Bill that we just mentioned. Now, Bill, he was a serial entrepreneur. He ran dry cleaners, liquor stores, he had lounges, he had apartment buildings, and he had this after hours club. He is going to allow to let Kent take over the club. This club was called Circus Disco, and Kent, he's going to jump in with both feet and impress his uncle very quickly, who is going to tap Kent to open a second location that would be located in Florence, Kentucky, and it's going to be called Circus Disco 2. And it says in the book that this became an immediate success. Kent reflects on his time saying the following: I was managing a business at the age of 24, meeting and dating a few ladies, and beginning to figure things out. I think that is excellent. I think he's starting to arrange his cards right here. For me, this is always one of my favorite parts. When someone has discovered their passion and they're on their path towards greatness. As the reader, you and I know that he's going to be successful, but this young version of Kent in this particular case, well, he obviously doesn't know it yet. And you and I, we get to see all of these struggles that yield so many valuable lessons. And the bright ones, they really learn from them and they feed them back into their plans, as we're about to see here. Now, the circus disco, it's going to do well, but after about 6 months, it starts to drop off. The primary reason was that it was about a 30-minute drive from where most customers were located, which was in the city of Cincinnati. He would undertake many different types of promos to try to get people to come back into the club. And eventually that just didn't quite work out. So Kent, he's going to convince his uncle to let him convert the club into a rock and roll bar. His uncle would agree and he would put Kent in charge of the design. Kent's going to say that this was a crash course. He learned things about like people flow, such as having cruise routes through the bar. In case some guy had got turned down by a lady, he could make an escape route and not have to walk past her again. So he was learning about people flow here. And then he was also talking about putting your booths at different levels so that guests from different tables don't stare at each other all night long. He really says that adjusting the booth heights just by a couple inches really had a big impact on the experience. That was quite interesting. I've never quite thought about that before. And I know some of the popular restaurants that I like to go to utilize that concept. So that is very interesting. And then he also says, that the lighting would be low so that everyone looked hot. They're going to bring in a lot of different types of bands. They're going to host fashion shows with free champagne for the women. And then they let the men come in after 10 p.m. so they would kind of get everyone jazzed up and excited. They had country night. They would have ladies' night. They would have bull riding. Basically, anything that you can dream up to bring crowds in. I really see this as trial and error, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And these are really beneficial lessons for Kent later on with Texas Roadhouse. When he fires that business up, he already has a general idea of what would work and what wouldn't work. So this is just trial and error for his future. One thing that I really admire about Kent is that he was not afraid to try anything, and he was okay at failing. That was perfectly fine. Kent didn't dwell on the past. He tried something, and if it worked, he kept doing it. If it didn't work, fine. Stop doing it, learn your lesson, and move forward. Don't dwell on the past, my friend. Just keep moving forward. Now, something important is going to happen here. He's going to run into a gentleman by the name of Jeff Ruby. He was also a club owner, and they spark up this like minded friendship. They would trade ideas, and they would generally encourage each other to keep going and to keep working hard. Then one day, he's going to get a call from Jeff, who asks him if he would like to open a club, if he would design the club, if he would be willing to put in all the sweat equity and run the club. He would make him a 20% partner. And Kent, he is overjoyed and says the following: that ownership and a chance to use my design skills were too much to pass up. I thanked Bill for believing in me, turned in my notice, and took the leap. I was finally going to become an entrepreneur. Kent, right here, he is going to work his ass off managing the construction of the new location that they were going to call Mabel Murphy's. This really gave him additional experience in some of the finer details, such as picking out plates, silverware, glassware, laying out menu options, fine-tuning the restaurant layout and the decor. And Kent says the following: that was awesome. And awesome it is going to be for him. They're going to start out super strong, and Kent, he is just on top of the world, but he's going to be in for a big shock here. You see, the landlord, he was an Italian guy with a less than stellar reputation. He was also a frequent customer, and he had seen how hip and popular the joint had become. He's always asking these questions, and Kent, he felt a little bit strange because he was asking questions like, what was the daily take? What food items are doing well? What food items aren't doing well? Just things that normal customers wouldn't quite ask. When you get that feeling like something's just a bit off, I really think this is what Kent felt here, and his gut is gonna be correct. He's gonna soon learn from Jeff. Remember, Jeff was the guy that he was working for. Well, Jeff had a partner, and his partner's name was Don. In the joint, Mabel Murphy's was actually in Don's name. So Don has all of the legal rights to this business. And Don, he had a silent partner. Any guesses who that partner might be? Yup, That little Italian guy. WTF, I tell you. Talk about being blindsided. Kent gets notified that they had made a new arrangement and they're going to take over 100% of the ownership from now on. This is Don and the little Italian guy. They wanted Kent to stay and run the place, not for a 20% equity or even a 10% equity, but merely just a 10% bonus. This is going to turn into a super valuable lesson for Ken at this early age, and it's also one for you and I. It's just so valuable. This lesson right here is to get the legal stuff done. Kent's going to say the following: we hadn't consulted a lawyer before jumping into this venture, and like a couple of clueless chumps, Jeff and I had no rights to anything. It was like some cautionary tale I'd learned about in business school when I had gone to class, except this was happening to me. Another lesson learned: get the legal stuff figured out before you go into business with anyone, and spend the money to hire yourself a lawyer who knows what he or she is doing. I was devastated. At this point, he could have packed it in, and it really reminds me of Sam Walton, who lost his first Ben Franklin store there in Newport, Arkansas, when the landlord saw how well he was doing and decided not to renew his lease and gave the store to his son. At that time, I believe that he was the top Ben Franklin store in all of the United States. After this, Sam made a lifelong rule for himself, and he says, always control your real estate whenever possible. Sam also could have packed it in here, but he was deeply driven to succeed. He knows that he had done it once and he can do it again. He's really learned the lessons about discount retailing. So he picks up from his losses. He moves to Bentonville, Arkansas, rebuilds his business into what we know today as Walmart. Now, another thing that I really like about this book is there's an appendix, and it's called Books I Dig. And number 7 on the list, Sam Walton, Made in America. Kent, he was a really big reader, and I can only imagine how much he related to Sam when he was reading about the loss of that first Ben Franklin store. Bottom line here, my friend, get the legal stuff figured out. It'll pay for itself in the long run. All right, let's keep going in the book here. Let's see. So after this, Kent, he's going to spend time working at a lot of different various clubs, and he would also be living with his girlfriend Laura at the time. One day, she's going to tell him that she is pregnant. This really changes Kent's perspective and the way that he approaches things, because he's currently working more than 100 hours a week. That certainly is not going to fly for any sort of home life. So Kent, he hits the street looking for a restaurant manager gig, and it wouldn't take him too long to land a job as a trainee at a place called Bennigan's in Louisville. Bennigan's was this Irish theme restaurant. I think they would grow to something like 300 locations. Then during the 2008 financial crisis, they would get hit really hard. It would end up shutting down like 90% of the stores that were in their network, I believe it was. But at this time, it's still 1983, and Kent, he's safe from all of that. In a typical Kent fashion, he is going to kick ass as a trainee. He works and learns all positions from the dishwasher to the server, and he's even going to work to improve the bar menu. That would help sales. One sentence that really stood out for me here in the book during this time: I wanted these full-time dishwashers to know I was there to learn from them, and I put in the effort to do it well. I tell you what, if everyone just took that approach in life, Kent really made it a priority in life to learn from others. Regardless of what title he held, he didn't care. He treated you like a friend and he wanted to learn from you. Then he put the effort in to do it well. And that sentence right there, it's so simple, yet it's very deep. Let our actions speak for ourselves. Put in that effort to do it well. As for Kent, he is soon going to find himself in Dallas at a week of classroom instruction. And then not long after that, he would be assigned to his first management gig in Dallas as well as a bar manager. 3 months later, he's going to be promoted to a service manager, overseeing the wait staff. Then not too long after that, he would take a role as a kitchen manager, in a different location, and that really rounded him out. He knew all of the different manager positions. So in 1985, he's going to be promoted to a full store manager of a Bennigan's that's located in Denver on Arapahoe Road, it says. Funny enough, I used to frequent that location when I lived in Denver, but I miss being served by Kent and his staff by at least 15 years or so. And it looks like possibly that location closed in 2010. However, as Kent arrives, he finds the store is at the back of the pack. They're doing something like $35,000 of sales per week. In so many episodes, we've talked about this concept of hiring top tier talent, the thoroughbreds that can really elevate your team and drive things forward. How just a few people with negative attitudes can really impact your culture. I think right here we get a real life example from Kent in just a few pages in the book here, and this is really worth its weight in gold. Plus, it demonstrates that you really can turn around a negative culture. Let me walk you through the transformation that takes place here. So, the culture at this Bennigan's was very toxic, and he needed to change it. He saw that. He isn't going to go any further if he doesn't change this culture. So, what he does is he spends time talking with each person. He says the following: by listening more than I talked, I learned a lot about each person, took note of their wants and skills, and got a pretty good sense of who was helping the cause and who was keeping us from reaching our potential. A plan developed quickly. To turn the store around, I would need to let a group of current folks go, about 20 who were toxic, and would have to hire 30 or 40 new people. Now, next is recruiting for Kent, and he's going to say the following. This is awesome. So, on my own dime, I would eat at other restaurants. When I spotted a talented host or server or got a well cooked meal, I'd introduce myself to the person responsible and give them my card. Did I get in trouble? Hell yeah. More than a few times, I was asked to vacate the premises by the manager. Did I care? Not at all. And I love the fact that he does not care about getting in trouble right here. He's looking for top tier talent that can join his team. Plus, he would work with the home office to have a bonus system implemented so that if employees recruited their upbeat and positive friends, they would get a little bonus, and that really helped as well. Kent says that he was looking for the following: high energy, fun people on the team. And those types of folks tend to hang out with other high energy, fun people. I didn't care what age or gender or anything else they were. The more diverse our team became, the better. The only requirement was a positive attitude and high energy. So, with this team staffed up, the next step is to let go of those donkeys, the ones with the toxic attitudes, the ones that are holding the organization down. Just listen to what Kent says right here. Once we'd hired about 20 new people, I was able to move on to the second part of the plan, eliminating the slackers and troublemakers. Funny thing, as I let people go, none of their teammates complained. If anything, with each layoff, the morale in the kitchen and the dining room soared. Team members were happier. They cleaned more, they moved faster, and they took more pride in their work. That just blows my mind. It's a simple yet deep plan. Hire fun people with that upbeat energy. It is very contagious. I'm sure if you were a guest at that time visiting Kent's restaurant, it would have been a fun and enjoyable experience for sure. I think for you and I, it just drives home what we've spoken about so many times in the past, over and over. Hire the top tier talent that you can afford in your business, my friend. For Kent, he's going to see the results. Sales are going to go up to over $50,000 a week, and his store was now a leader in his region. Things, they're looking really good for Kent right here. But he is soon going to be shocked as his wife tells him that she would like to file for a divorce, as he had really become obsessed with working and he was hardly ever home. So once she leaves, he's going to be playing the role of a single dad to his two daughters, and that's going to prove to be extremely difficult for him. So he decides to leave Bennigan's and he would head back to Louisville, where he had a lot more family support that could help him out. Once he arrives back in Kentucky, he's going to find a job with KFC as like a regional manager where he's overseeing managers of multiple stores. He says that he immediately start putting his mark on the stores. One in particular, he had convinced the manager to let him start putting different food items on the menu. And that really gets him into trouble quickly. He was trying to see what worked and what didn't work. But as a result, he's going to learn a really valuable lesson and be turned on to something that's going to fuel his growth for the long term. His vice president is going to basically say, Kent, you're an independent thinker. You're a bit of a rogue here. And you should probably think about, going out and doing your own thing. And he's going to take him a step further. He could have just ended right there. But he's going to give him a copy of the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And Kent's reaction to the book, I dug in. And that's brilliant. 3 short words. I dug in. I guess he could have tossed it in the back seat of his car and it would have sat there for years possibly. But instead he takes it to heart, and he really does. He digs in. Where might that lead him, you might ask? Well, for many years he had been chasing a gentleman by the name of John Y. Brown. Mr. Brown was a friend of Kent's dad, and subsequently he was also the owner of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Brown had bought KFC from Colonel Sanders for $2 million. He would go on to add over 3,000 locations and then sell it just 7 years later for $284 million. Quite a nice return, I must say there. In addition, Brown was also the governor of Kentucky from 79 to 83. Now, John, he had rejected Kent over and over and over, and Kent, he never backed down. John Brown says the following in the book. Kent's dad was a dear friend of mine growing up in Lexington. Kent chased after me for about 5 years, pitching various restaurant ideas. He was a big dreamer, lots of energy, very persistent. He was very curious, always asking questions, but wore me out if I'm honest with you. I just love that tenacity and that persistence in which Kent attacks his targets. Once he has something in his mind, he doesn't give it up. Right here, we're going to find Kent in yet another pitch to John Brown. This time, he's going to be selling him really hard on a Colorado-themed steakhouse idea that he was calling Aspen Inn. In addition, he's going to float an alternate concept of a blue-collar cowboy steakhouse called Texas Roadhouse. Now, after this meeting, John says, I'll think about it. I'll let you know. Several days later, John calls Kent back and says, I like that Aspen Inn idea. Let's move forward with that. So the plan was to convert one of John's chicken places into this Aspen idea. He would also become a 20% partner, and he would take on a salary of $40,000 a year. John would put $80,000 up to convert this location, but he suggests that they come up with a new name. Kent's daughter had suggested the name Buckhead Bar and Grill. So one day when Kent was on the phone with John, he just tosses that name out there. John likes it, it's accepted, and they roll forward with the Buckhead Bar and Grill. Now what we see next is that Kent, he really learns from his past, and he's going to say the following. I like this. This is great. John and I had a solid agreement reviewed by his lawyer and mine, and he was a high integrity guy whom I trusted. But given my earlier nightclub contract mistake, my own lawyer seemed like a good idea, and I could not agree more. To get this new location started, they're going to move swiftly into action. All of the decor inside would be Colorado themed, with pictures of mountains. They'd have wooden skis and snowshoes on the wall. They had a big stuffed buffalo, and then they had like a bar area and a separate dining area. As they opened up, they had generally fairly decent crowds, it says. But Kent, he did admit that the food needed a lot of work. Right here, we see him again. He's working 100+ hours a week trying to make this place work. And then he runs into a roadblock. However, things are going to get worse when they would receive a negative review in one of the local newspapers. And this is really going to drive away what's left of a very thin line of customers anyways. Kent, he has to dig and scrounge here, and he gets creative because he says that their payroll was down to less than $2. He couldn't even cash his own paycheck, and these are just really desperate times. So Kent's going to go around and hit up all the hotels, handing out discount coupons. He would put an ad in the paper with that same coupon, and he says that guests would show up, but they would never really come back if they didn't have that coupon. At this point, this effort is basically just allowing them not to crash and burn while he figures out what the hell to do next. He does have a radical idea, and he's going to go back to his partner John and he's going to ask for $20,000. With this money, they're going to change the theme to a bar and pub that would have a lot of live entertainment. Then they would also slim down the menu, and he says they would add ice cold beer. Now, how would he get the word out? I guess you could say through a little trade. Listen to this. One of their customers was a DJ on a popular radio station. So he asked the DJ to go on the radio and talk about the place like he had just discovered it and how great it was and how good the food was and how good the bands were. At first, this is met with a lot of resistance, but Kent, in his style, he keeps pressing and he finally gets an agreement for this. Kent's going to say the following. Andy DJ was talking about us on the afternoon drive time slot like he had just discovered a cure for baldness. As a result, their sales would shoot up quite dramatically. He says that they were selling more beer than they were food, which always makes for a healthy profit margin. Kent is finally able to cash his paychecks, and in addition, he can pay back all those IOUs from his kids' piggy banks. Kent's tenacity right here is simply untouched by any. He absolutely gets after it. I believe it was through those high quality books that really helped him to focus, and it gave him a different perspective, and it empowered him with the confidence that he could be successful. At the end of this chapter, one of Kent's lessons learned during that time, this is perhaps my most favorite one in the whole book. It says the following. There's a lot to learn from the right leadership books. If you think you know it, think again. Ask those you trust what books have inspired them and dig in. Always have at least one book going. And I couldn't agree more. As we always say on the show here, readers are leaders, my friend. Always be reading. Now, with this new success, for Kent, you think that maybe he would just sit back and enjoy it for a bit, but no. Instead, he goes right back to John and starts pitching Texas Roadhouse. And John is going to agree to Kent being a 20% owner, but this time Kent wants 50%, and he's actually going to turn John down this time and tell him, no, I'm looking for something a little bit better than 20%. Where might he look for other potential investors? Well, remember, the bar is now full of people. Kent says the following. I was back to pitching my Texas Roadhouse idea to any patron in Buckhead or anywhere else around town whom I felt had a hidden cache of cash to invest. Every week I set a goal for how many times I would get turned down, and the list kept growing longer. Looking back, I shouldn't have been surprised by the rejection. I eventually turned my focus to doctors and dentists, figuring they might not be as business savvy as the restaurateurs, but would still have deep pockets. And listen to this, finally, after 130 rejections, yes, 130, that is crazy, Kent, he finds a potential in a doctor group, and let me just read for you here what he says. I was on my game. Noel and Ryan couldn't have pitched any better. The doctors hung on every word, at least that's how I remember it, and asked some insightful questions. But they didn't need a ton of selling. They immediately grasped the concept. God bless the learned. On the spot, the three agreed to fund the build for the first Texas Roadhouse, to be located in Clarksville, Indiana. Each would put up $100,000, with all four of us signing a bank loan to add another $250,000. And what they would agree on is a 70-30 split, 70 to the doctors and 30 to Kent. In addition, Kent is going to do something quite genius here. He's going to work out a 1% royalty on all sales for all stores. And I just wonder how that worked out for him in the long run. I imagine early days when you think about one or two stores, that's not a big deal. But now that they have 600-700 stores, that is a really big deal and a super smart move by Kent. So as they get started here, Kent, he agrees to no salary during the construction phase that started in the fall of 92 because he's still working at the Buckhead Bar and Grill during the nighttime and he's managing the build during the day. Kent's going to take another brilliant move here in that he would find a managing partner, Brian Judd. He would convince Brian to put up $30,000 to become a 10% store owner. I really like that concept. I mean, basically, you're empowering someone as an owner. And when they're financially invested, they're going to work their asses off so much harder. And I think this is really a wise move in the restaurant business. It's a concept that Texas Roadhouse is going to deploy for the long term. He would say that for $25,000, the managing partner would get 10% of the store's bottom line. And they've done this more than 600 times now, which I think is generally very impressive. Now, if we flip back to that first store here, his first managing partner would go and work to hire a kitchen manager and a service manager. So that's a smart move because the managing partner is also taking some of that workload off of Kent, helping to get things ready. As they open, Kent is going to roll out this concept of a server only working 3 tables at a time. And keep in mind that the industry standard is 4 to 6 tables. So by doing this, Kent is saying, I want a deeper commitment to customer service. You get your drinks faster, you get your refills faster, you get your food faster. The servers have more time to spend with each individual guest, making them feel at home. Plus, you get to turn your tables over faster as well so you can service more guests at the end of the day. This first location is also going to have a healthy supply of country music. They had all of their meat in cases in the front that were open to display for the public. And then the best part, I think, is plenty of free bread to go around for everyone. And things immediately start off with a bang. They do really, really well. This is going to lead them into an expansion quite quickly. The second store is going to be located in Gainesville, Florida. And then shortly thereafter, they add Cincinnati, Ohio, Sarasota, Florida, and Clearwater, Florida. And right here, Kent makes a bold admission. Let me just read for you. Those stores opened to extremely poor sales. I broke my rule with Cincinnati and didn't do my homework, ending up with a lousy location. So those locations, the Sarasota and Clearwater stores, they did well during the winter months when the snowbirds were in town, but the other 8 months of the year, Kent says that they were basically flat or they were dead. So he has, at this point, 2 profitable stores that are now covering the 3 that were losing money. In times they were looking kind of super rough here. They were barely breaking even. And to top it off, his doctors, they stopped investing and they were generally done. They weren't happy with this failure here. So now he's really up shit creek. But we also know that Kent, he has been here before. Remember that pain from those 1,500 miles earlier? He knows pain. Kent knows pain. He knows what to do here. And let's see what happens. With a revived sense of purpose, instead of wallowing in my recent failures, I pulled up my big boy britches and dug into all the business books I could find. They confirm my many mistakes: bad real estate decisions, bad people decisions, inconsistent food quality, and poor training. My doctors were history. Bills were mounting. I was in survival mode once again. Ever the optimist, I figured if I could find a couple of new investors, we could right the ship. Sooner or later, I would have to make the hard call to close those 3 underperforming restaurants. It was incredibly demoralizing. I had mementos on the wall of my office from each of those 3 stores reminding me of the people affected by their failure, the money lost, and the lessons learned. With 2 restaurants still successful, I somehow kept the faith. To top it off during this time, Kent would lose one of his good friends, Tom. He was just 38 years old when he passed away, and it was said in the book that he had a blood clot in his leg that had moved to his brain, and Kent was just devastated, and this was part of that fuel to reinvigorate himself and just keep charging hard and turn things around. I think it's when we're at the lowest points in life that we can reflect back and really appreciate the good things that we had, and at the same time, we can set a vision for the future. And for Kent, It is dig in deep time. Kent, he is a fighter, and he's not gonna just roll over. Now, to fix the food quality issues, he's gonna hire a legendary chef by the name of Jim Boyles, and he's gonna help him slim down the menu. They're gonna focus on only the highest quality recipes that could be scaled across the locations. Kent says the following: stick to what you do best. In our case, it's steaks, ribs, and chicken. That reminds me a lot of Harry Schneider at In-N-Out Burger, who also developed a super simple menu: burgers, fries, drinks, and he kept it like that. While so many others were adding salads and wraps, kids' menus, breakfast items, whatever, you name it, Harry avoided all that crap. He just made the best damn burger that you could buy. Keep it simple. Simple, simple always wins the day. Kent's going to go find some new investors that would be able to help him with his short term operations. So he's really taking the bold steps here that he needs to shore up his menu and to keep his operations going. Now, in the book from January of 95 through 2020, what Kent does is he outlines the growth of the company all along the way, year by year. I think what I would like to do here is just look at the key milestones along the way, because there's a lot of lessons learned, specifically how they treated their employees, or their roadies as they called them. And I'm quite impressed by how Kent supported all of those that he worked with. And then we'll look at some other lessons learned as well. At the start of 95 here, they have 5 stores, as we already know. 3 are failing. And by the end of 97, they would reach 15 stores. And how did they gain so many stores that fast? Well, Kent had been approached by several individuals who wanted to do franchising, and Kent was open to that way of doing business, and he felt that that would be a stream of revenue coming in for the company. So in order to do this, Kent's going to hire a Texas law firm. Oh, by the way, they were the same ones that did the franchising for his competitor, Outback. Let's just see what Kent says about that. There was a law firm in Dallas that had done franchising for Outback, and they put together the paperwork. I'm pretty sure they mostly used the same format they had used for our competitor, just swapping out our name for theirs. But it worked, and all of a sudden we were growing again. So along with this growth, he stabilized the food menu, and things are really starting to look up here for Texas Roadhouse. But for Kent, he has this really big vision, and things weren't quite moving as fast as he had wanted, so he had to devise a plan because he needed more money. So, where's the money going to come from then? Well, Garth Brooks, of course. At least that was his plan. Let's read and see how this works out. I made some inquiries and found out that he had offices. Really? A country music singer with offices? I know, right? With no appointment, naturally, I barged in like I owned the joint to find the place deserted. I peeked into offices. Not a soul in sight. I waited for an hour in the waiting room until the receptionist finally appeared, maybe coming back from lunch break, who looked at me like I had just stepped off the moon. She said there was no one there for me to meet with, especially not Garth Brooks. I handed over my proposal and drove back home. But I didn't give up. After a few days, I called his offices, left a message, but still no response. I called again, then again, and again. Finally, I got a call back. After a hectic evening in one of our stores, I found a message waiting on my cell phone. Mr. Kent Taylor? This is so and so from Mr. Brooks' office. Holy crap! I inhaled deeply, a smile forming. Then I heard, could you please stop calling? We aren't interested. Click. I just love Kent's tenacity and his outside the box thinking here. Always looking for friends in low places, I guess you could say. Now, Kent, he is even going to try to chase down Larry Bird in the airport. He doesn't have any success with that. And then while on vacation to Bermuda, he gets a tip from a server that tech billionaire Ross Perot was on the island staying in his private home. So what's Kent going to do? He's going to go try to track him down. He takes his proposal to Ross Perot's house, slipping past his security detail. He would knock on the front door and he didn't get an answer, so he leaves the proposal on the doorstep. Now, of course, he never heard back from Mr. Perot, but the tenacity to chase his dreams, I think, is certainly very infectious. I can just imagine hanging out with Ken, all the wild and crazy ideas we could brainstorm up and get after. Now, past this, Kent's going to have to come up with a new approach. So, what he's going to do is he's going to put together a $5 million private placement. With this structure, it would see Kent retain more than 50% of the company in that 1% royalty that we spoke about earlier. All of the early investors, they would hold 35%, and then 15% of the company would be put up for that private placement. So this is going to allow him breathing room, and it also allows him upward trajectory, as they're generally going to open about 20 to 30 new stores a year on a fairly consistent basis past this. Another thing happens too around 97, in which Kent says they adopted this zap attitude. And this is about creating a positive vibe with employees versus sucking the energy out of them. He had worked at a lot of different companies in the past where they just sucked the life out of him. You know, when you were watching the clock and you just want to get the hell out of there? He didn't want to have any part of that. He vowed to never let that happen at Texas Roadhouse. So he institutes this positive vibe culture, and it really pays off big for them. In addition, Kent adopts a bottom up approach. And let me just read for you here what he says about this. To envision a bottom up organization, think of an upside down pyramid. In this type of company, the leader is at the bottom and learns from the frontline people at the top. The leader's job is to support, encourage, and finally celebrate his or her people's success, sometimes even failures. Success is so often built on attempts that don't always get results, but have powerful lessons that eventually lead to kick ass ideas. Too many companies, small businesses, and even governments punish risk takers or punish the managers for allowing their people to go rogue. In those cultures, failures get hidden out of fear of scorn or even job loss. Then, to put this action into words, Kent describes even further how he accomplishes this. As a leader, I've always believed you have to get your ass out of the office and go visit the people in the stores or wherever you have your business. And when you see a great idea, you write the person who brought it up a note and you thank them. I send out many notes every month. I believe so much in actively seeking feedback from our stores, especially for those working directly with the customers, that some Sunday nights after the weekend rush, I'll call stores at random and ask to talk to half a dozen servers and ask if guests like or dislike new menu items, what guests are complaining about, what they're raving about, and so on. When I visit a restaurant, my first stop is always with the servers. Then I make my way to the meat room, then the kitchen line, and finally to the managing partner. By the time I get to the managing partner, I know if he or she is full of crap because I've already talked to the other people. And that is so real for you and I, how this works. We saw this with Sam Zamuri also on episode 9. Sam the Banana Man, he started at the bottom as a fruit jobber peddling bananas that no one wanted, and he outworked everyone and he rose to the top. Yet all along the way, he remained in the fields, in the train yards, and in the warehouses and on the ships. He believed in his workers and would often go to them first to learn what was going on in the business. Harry Schneider at In-N-Out Burger is another great example of this, of leading on the front lines. The only reason he expanded his restaurant was so that he could allow employees to advance their careers. So each time he felt that he had a solid new manager for a store, he would set off and open a new one. Plus, he always encouraged employees to provide feedback on menu items and operations, and he mostly promoted from within as well. That was another major thing that he did. If you haven't read that book, In-N-Out Burger, a behind-the-counter look at the fast food chain that breaks all the rules by Stacy Perman, that is an excellent, excellent read, and I hope to cover it for you in the near future here on an upcoming episode. Then, speaking of promoting from within, This was also Kent's core belief to promote from within. As employees on the inside, they understood the company values and the culture, and they were best positioned to lead. He saw outsiders, those with MBAs, who had their fancy charts and their graphs and their business theories, as someone to avoid because they didn't have any freaking clue how to run a successful restaurant or how to empower people or motivate staff. Always from within, he promoted, always from within. Time and time again, we see this. When we do this, my friend, it really fosters a deep sense of loyalty for your employees. Plus, it gives them goals to strive for their career development and advancement. And I believe it helps build that purpose driven culture that really propels us and drives us forward for long term success. I just wanted to take a quick moment here and call out a few examples from the book. First is that of Mike Schmidt. He had started as a busboy and rose up to become a regional market partner, overseeing more than 100 stores. That is quite amazing. Gina Tobin, she ran the first prototype store in 96 and would later become vice president of training. Tanya Robinson began as a staff accountant and she would rise up to become chief financial officer after 22 years with the company. Again, that is just very, very impressive that she's giving the opportunity to come in and learn and grow with the company and take on that executive leadership role. There's so many more examples in the book, and I just really admire how much Kent poured into his employees. At the same time, he allowed them to pour their learnings back into him so that he could lead effectively. Now, Kent, he also celebrated his employees and their spouses. Each year, they would have an annual conference that was generally held at a different resort destination. I tell you, this just sounds like a super fun event. I wish I could certainly attend one of these. At this event, they would name the managing partner of the year. They would also call out their legend award. Then they would gather all of the roadies together and they would spend a day going out in the community and just doing volunteer work and just providing a set of helping hands for the community. Then at nighttime, just legendary entertainment. I just compiled a real short list of the various acts that have performed over the years. I just wanted to read that down here real quickly. This is awesome. Willie Nelson, Hootie and the Blowfish, the Doobie Brothers, Counting Crows, Earth, Wind and Fire, Collective Soul, Five for Fighting, KC and the Sunshine Band, Snoop Dogg, Foreigner, Kenny Chesney, and Toby Keith. And that's just to name a few. There were so many more. Another thing that I really admired by here is that Kent, he wasn't afraid to spend the money on his employees. He was really the master of fun. In the book, it says that he even paid for several of those bands out of his own pocket so that he didn't strain their marketing budget too heavily with this particular event. I mean, I think these kind of events are just infectious. When you have a company that's really just willing to spend that kind of money on entertainment and taking care of you as a person, this just really breeds company loyalty. And I can see why they have so many long-term employees. Plus, this level of fun, it just spills over into the culture. Or I should probably just say that it is part of the culture. Fun is embedded in their culture, and it's seen every night at the party that they throw at their Texas Roadhouse locations. Then, to go even further to support employees, we're not done yet here. Their director of care and concern, Dee Shaughnessy, would set up what is known as Andy's Outreach. I think this program is incredible. I just wish more companies would do this. So, under this program, Roadies could donate part of their paycheck that would go to help frontline employees. Think like funerals, floods, surgeries, things like that. Then, in addition, they have one company store in Utah that was donating 95% of their profits into the fund. And then during the COVID times, Kent would personally write a check for $5 million as extra help for roadies who needed support during that time. That went into the fund as well. And then the results, these results are just impressive. As of 2021, the fund has helped over 12,500 employees and has distributed something like $17 million. Hats off to Texas Roadhouse. This is incredible. If you just stop and think about this for a second, a lot of their staff is younger. And when you're first starting out, you don't have a lot of money. I remember when I was starting out, that one or two, $3,000, that is a huge deal. And that could actually change someone's entire life trajectory right there. So by helping employees with this emergency fund, they're doing the proper thing right here. They're taking care of their needs. And at the same time, how many employees feel an even deeper connection knowing that they have that level of security there? And hopefully, it also is teaching them at the same time the value of saving for a rainy day when you might run into an emergency like this. I think this alone is a true learning lesson for any company out there that doesn't have a program like this in place. Now, if we turn our focus to look at guest and food quality, there are several programs that were put into place that I find quite amazing that make Texas Roadhouse unique, and I just wanted to walk through a few of those. One program is called Manager in the Window. So before each plate of food goes out, a manager ensures that every guest receives legendary food. So they're making sure that everything's put together properly, everything has a good visual appeal, everything's cooked how the guest ordered their food. It's not someone just new starting off on the job sending food out into the environment. It's a trained manager who knows exactly what to look for, ensuring that everything goes out perfectly. Another thing that I liked here is they established what was known as alley rallies. So at the beginning of each shift, they share any specials, how the previous day's sales were, any goals they might have, and then they just get people jacked up and energized and ready to face customers that are about ready to come in for legendary food and legendary service. Another one that I really liked here is what they called Willie's Corner. So they took one booth at every location and they would feature memorabilia and pictures from the legend Willie Nelson. Not only was Willie a personal friend of Kent's, he was also a partner in many stores. It's programs like this that allow them for continuous, steady, sustained growth over the years. Now, if we keep going here, we find ourselves in 2004. Kent's in a position where he really feels like he needs to take the company public. And in just this one or two chapters where he talks about going public, there's so many lessons alone in those chapters. There's one that really stood out for me. This one hits home. This was the fact that Kent wanted super voting rights for his shares. So with the super voting right, he would get 10 votes for each of his shares. Basically, he doesn't want to lose control of the company after the IPO. And I really believe that this came through his extensive reading and his wise counsel that he had around him, and that this really helped him a great deal come to this important decision. Kent says the following: I called Don Tyson, CEO of Tyson Foods, and he said, "You started the company, right? And you stayed true to your vision and your people, right?" I said, "Yes, sir." He concluded with, "Well, damn it, son, you should stay with it and to hell with them." Yes, sir. My stand on super voting rights didn't go over too well with the bankers who threatened to bail. And how many do you think would bail? None of them. They were just trying to put pressure on him to erode control of his own company. Again, I think it's just another fantastic move for Kent to retain control right here. They're going to go on to have a successful IPO and would raise $183 million. And this was a really big success. Now, a big question: is Kent invested in the future? Or is he going to punch out and take the retirement path like so many might do? Let's see what he says. I think we both know what he's going to say before I read this. At this point, I recognize that for most founders, the story would end here. They'd take their share and retire to a nice cabin in the Poconos or an island off Key West. I enjoyed the moment, no doubt, but the next week I was back in my office, moving full steam ahead. There would be more growth, more people, and more lessons to learn. In terms of lessons, he didn't let Wall Street push him around when it came to growth of his own company. And I really admire this. So many companies are trying to meet the Wall Street expectations or to not lose a quarter or a nickel or a dollar from their stock price. Kent, he took the road less traveled and he does the right thing. He says the following: in 2007, we topped 1 billion in sales for the first time. I realized with our excessive growth from that point forward, we would only grow at a pace that could be justified by our development of people and not by the availability of funds. We surely could use our cash flow and borrowed funds to grow up to 40 or 50 restaurants per year. But execution, culture, and not stretching people too far must rule the day. Our training, along with our front and back of house assimilation, should take a minimum of 12 to 14 months, with 18 to 24 months the best amount of time to set our people up for success and full participation in our unique culture. From my perspective, that is just plain wise leadership. And it's one of the reasons that I believe this book is really a master map on how to be successful in business. I've worked at several companies myself that are only concerned about growing and they hire the bare minimum amount of people needed and then they work the living shit out of them. And that always results in a poor culture and even worse, a poor customer experience. At the same time here, I think Kent, he's really holding true to his roots. He knows what it takes to run a successful restaurant. By having had worked on the front lines, he knew that he could easily damage the mission of legendary food, legendary service by growing so fast. He let these four words, legendary food, legendary service, guide him in all of his directions. And he really did live true to his vision and his mission statement. He felt it and he lived it. Legendary food and legendary service. And this continues forward to this day. Now, I want to take us up to 2020 in the pandemic. So it's during the pandemic that Kent digs in really deep to keep the company afloat and to protect his employees. And I just wanted to summarize some of the key events from 2020. These are the major, bold decisions that he makes as the leader of the company. At the start of the pandemic, their store sales were averaging something like $105,000 a week. So that's the average across 600 stores. So before things started getting real bad, Kent goes out and he pulls down a $200 million line of credit. And that was a security blanket for the company. He didn't really give a shit about what that looked like to Wall Street. He went and he secured the money that he needed to keep his operations afloat because no one really knew what was going to happen or how long this was going to last. Another thing here that I admire is he learns lessons quickly. So they had international stores at this point, and they had reached out to the people on the ground there, and they were saying you're going to need things like masks, gloves, and thermometers. Long before anyone was ever forced to wear this, Kent goes out and he buys as much personal protective equipment as he could. And many are kind of laughing at him for doing this, but that decision would prove to be very wise as things really got heated up. And of course, everyone knows we were forced to wear masks anyways. Then he decides to move the party from the dining room to the parking lot. So they put everything out in the parking lot. They're going to offer killer deals on various family packs. From his view, they were really helping to feed the communities. A lot of grocery stores are running low on supplies at this point. Kent is also constantly on the phone with all of the managing partners out in the field. He's trying to learn what they need, what is working, and what is not working. And then he takes all of those lessons that he's learned and he spreads them all around the company, such as some stores that were selling ready to grill steaks. So you just buy the steak, bring it home, and cook it to perfection. Some stores were doing farmers markets. They were selling veggies and other foods because local grocery stores were low on supplies and they had them available and they were going to sell them. So many stores started implementing farmers markets. As the pandemic is heating up, Kent, he's going to forego his salary. And then, as we mentioned earlier, he puts $5 million of his own money into Andy's outreach. providing that extra level of support for employees that really needed assistance. So, around this time when the pandemic is just getting started, we're about 2 weeks into the pandemic, they see their average store sales plummet to 29,000 a week. And that is just painful. So, what are they going to do? They're going to double down and they're going to pay their employees higher wages and bonuses if they showed up to work. That's going to allow the food costs to go up from about 30% to 40 or 50%. And he didn't really care because he knew that he needed to survive. And at the same time, he needed to feed customers that he was servicing. I really love what he says right here. If we could break even when adding our food costs, labor, rent, and other expenses, then who cared if we didn't make a profit for a while? If we could provide a service to people in need, keep the roadies employed, and feed America, then we were staying true to our values. Amen. I find that incredibly inspiring. Just what a fantastic view and a blessing that you can use your business in that way and in that manner to help feed people and also provide paychecks. Too many companies out there say that they care. It's so rare to find one that just puts the actions front and center. They weren't bold and they weren't bragging about it. They were just taking actions and doing the right things. Now, towards the end of March, another bold action here. The roadies are going to receive a stimulus check, and these aren't the government ones. Kent had used part of that $200 million credit line to put cash directly into employees' pockets. And they're going to be so thankful. They're the ones that are going to go out on the social media and they're going to tell everyone what Texas Roadhouse has been doing. And that just blows everything up and makes it go crazy in the social media sphere. They would just have lines of customers waiting to buy food from the parking lots. Sales are going to shoot up a little bit here to $49,000 a week after 4 weeks. And then it says after 6 weeks, they had reached $63,000 as an average. And I think that's pretty impressive because before the pandemic, they were only doing about $8,000 a week in to-go orders. So they're up over $55,000 a week just in to-go orders. That is extremely impressive here. Now, as we roll forward, we get into May and their dining rooms would start opening back up on a limited basis. And eventually revenues would generally stabilize for the company. And this one chapter in the book, it's worth the entire cost of the book alone. Kent just loved this company and everything that it was. It's just so heartwarming and inspiring for you and I to see a founder with this much passion and drive. I highly, highly recommend this book, my friend. I don't think you can be disappointed. Normally, at the end of the episode, you and I recap the top lessons learned. For the show today, I'm going to let the words of Kent Taylor speak truth into us as they're spelled out in the appendix on leadership from this legendary founder. And in Kent's memory here, I'm just going to read them so you can hear them. When I think of great leadership, I think of good listening skills, passion, commitment, honesty, positivity, innovation, and effective communication. Other important terms include clear vision, humility, focus, and empathy. Still, other terms include drive, persistence, courage, gratitude, standards, expectations, and accountability. This may sound like a lot, but that's what it takes. Relationships rule the day. Relationships with our folks, suppliers, guests, and our communities are why it's so cool I get to be in the restaurant business. Our roadies get to throw a party in our buildings every night, proud to serve our family of guests with something yummy for your tummy and an ice cold beverage and some delicious rolls. One thing that stands out in the lives of most leaders is that they each had a job at an early age and at some point had to overcome a struggle. Abraham Lincoln was born into a farming family and had a strained relationship with his father. Sam Walton, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jack Welch, Sarah Blakely, Herb Kelleher, and Phil Knight all worked early in life and each overcame early struggles. I could train my mind to be more open to positivity and motivation by reading or listening to motivational books on tape. Whether it was the work of Dr. Norm Vincent Peale, Zig Ziglar, Dr. Wayne Dwyer, or Tony Robbins, I digested as much as I could, accepting positivity and pushing out the negativity. Finding role models and mentors also seems to be a constant trait among those successful people. I also found that as a few people evolve, get promoted, and gain more personal wealth, their focus and intensity can sometimes fall off. That's why it's critical to stay connected to your frontline folks and spot and confront those who lose focus before they screw up. Let's go back to Texas Roadhouse, circa 1993 to 1995. Three of our first five restaurants were failing, money was tight, and change was necessary as disaster was imminent. Fear of failure was a more motivating factor than striving for success at that point. A new 1996 was a critical year for our survival. That was the year a book called Nuts came out. It's about Herb Kelleher and Southwest Airlines, written by Kevin and Jackie Freiberg. It changed how I thought about business, how I was choosing people, training them, and how our culture at Texas Roadhouse needed to evolve. My top learnings from this book: 1. Keep things simple, managing good times and bad. 2. Hire for spirit, spunk, and enthusiasm, then train for skill. 3. Do whatever it takes. 4. Develop a genuine interest in the knowledge of others. Ask to learn, listen to learn, and watch to learn. 5. Own mistakes. Share mistakes, learn from mistakes, and move on. 6. Focus on individuals and capabilities, not titles. Deal with people, not positions. 7. Don't let rules, systems, and procedures be your guide. 8. Create a lean organization, one in which it is difficult to hide poor performance, and one that continually stamps out bureaucracy. 9. Think like an owner about your job and your life. Focus on results, regardless of who's watching. And then number 10, make your organizational and personal mission, vision, and values clear. And make sure to recognize others, celebrate, and have fun along the way. That is all, my friend. Such wise wisdom right there. Sadly, Kent would end his life in 2021. He had been suffering from a very severe, debilitating tinnitus in the ears. That's like a ringing of the ear. But it was said that this was very, very severe, and he had got this after having contracted COVID. He had sought the best medical treatment, but to no avail. Things just continued to get worse and worse over time for him. Even during his last days on Earth, he was working on this book. Kent hand wrote this entire book, and he sent it over to his team to draft up. One of his last requests on the final read was to remove any negativity, as Kent never dwelled in the past, and he didn't want the book to reflect that either. In one of his last memos to his employees, Kent quotes T.S. Eliot by saying, "Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go." In the words of Travis Doster, who wrote the afterword of this book and is the VP of Communications for Texas Roadhouse, he leaves us with the following sentences that are oh so beautiful. Kent not only pushed himself far, but pushed everyone around him to go further than even we thought possible. I hope that after you hear Made from Scratch, you're inspired to go even further than you could have imagined. That would have been Kent's dream for you. And with that, we'll close, my friend. If you have a chance to pick the book up, I highly recommend it. Thanks for listening today, my friend. I hope you found some value in the episode today and could take a few things away that push you to go a little bit further than you thought you could go. Until next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.